So as many of you remember, last year we were talking about the possibility of having new microtransit service in the township, which was super exciting. And the Bus Revolution team, as I'm sure Harley's going to share with you, has taken a lot of feedback for the whole network after the first draft of the redesign of the network and made some revisions to that plan. And unfortunately, in that plan, from my perspective, unfortunately, the microtransit service has been taken out of the second draft. So, you know, and there are obviously reasons for that Harley will go into, but nevertheless, there are significant changes coming to the region. And I think that's what Harley is going to cover today, but hopefully specifically address Montgomery Township and the surrounding areas that are of most concern to this group. So take it away, Harley. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for inviting me and for adding me to your agenda. I appreciate the context there, Jackie. So yeah, I'm going to talk about where we are in this project overall, but I will spend some time talking about how we made that decision for removing the microtransit from Montgomery Township, what data we used, and then also opportunities that you have for feedback and to be part of that decision. I am going to share my screen. I think we're there. And then I will say I can't see anyone now by doing that. So if you have any questions, feel free to just speak up because I won't be able to see you otherwise. And that is sort of housekeeping what I was going to say. So good morning, everyone. Thank you again for having me here to share an update on SEPTA's Bus Revolution, which is our bus network redesign. And quick overview of what I'm going to discuss, just some context for the project, a summary of the feedback that we heard from our fall engagement, and then an update, as Jackie alluded to, from where we are with our current revised draft network that's specific to the North Penn area. And then we'll have time for some questions and answers, and I can zoom into some of our maps for more detail and some of the data sets that we use to make the decisions that we made. I always like to start with these first few slides about why we're doing this, because we are introducing massive change into our bus network, and people always ask why we are doing it. And it's because our routes have remained largely unchanged since SEPTA incorporated in 1964. However, our land use and the way that people live and how they get around has changed a lot in the last 60 years. We also have experienced a lot of ridership decline, and that started pre-pandemic in 2013. Between 2013 and 2019, we lost about 20% of our ridership. But at the same time, the cost of providing service went up for us. And that was not just in Center City, but also in the suburban counties. You know, Route 96 on US 202 comes to mind. We've added operators and vehicles to that service to King of Prussia, to Plymouth Meeting, to address traffic and congestion in those areas. So that means we add vehicles, we add operators, which costs, it impacts our operating budget, but at the same time, our riders don't benefit from that increased frequency. We're adding that service just to maintain the same frequency that we have. And so while our operating budgets go up, operating costs go up and our ridership declines, that's clearly not a sustainable model for us. And this was all, you know, around 2019. And then with the pandemic, of course, that exacerbated that issue of ridership decline. So that was when our ridership really plummeted, and it's been pretty slow to return. As of fall 2023, we are at about 73% of our pre-pandemic ridership for the bus mode alone. And that's been the mode that where ridership has returned the quickest. Our regional rail is still at about 50% of our pre-pandemic ridership. So it's important that we really step back and make sure that who's riding today in 2023, that we are serving the needs of the people who are still riding our system coming out of the pandemic. So that's why we are doing this. The project schedule, and I do believe my colleague Dan Nemiroff may be presented in the fall. So hopefully a lot of this is not new to you. We're about 2 years into the bus revolution. We shared a draft network for the new bus network in the fall, and we received a lot of feedback from our riders, from our stakeholders, and then we spent the winter incorporating that feedback. And what we're currently sharing this spring, what I'm sharing with you today, is that revised draft network. And we will continue to make revisions this summer based on feedback we're hearing this spring, and then we plan to go to public hearings in the fall. And then I am going to give you just an overview of what we heard in that fall engagement, because we do want to make sure that our stakeholders, our riders, know that we are listening, and we really took that feedback that we heard to heart and made changes based on it. So some of the main themes that we heard they involved around frustration and concern around additional transfers. That was a big issue in the city. Also, the city and the suburbs, both, we had a lot of concerns about routes being eliminated, a lot of concerns around safety and security, again, not just on the Market Frankfurt line and the subway, but also at 69th Street at Norristown Transportation Center, at Frankfurt Transportation Center, which are really anchors for a lot of our suburban services. We also heard issues about access to schools. That's more of an issue in the city of Philadelphia because we do provide school service there. But we also heard some positive feedback around the increased frequency of service, the addition of weekend service, and that is huge in the suburbs because a number of our suburban bus routes only operate 6 days a week. So being able to provide 7-day-a-week service is a massive improvement for a lot of our riders. We have more midday, more evening service. That was something that we received a lot of positive feedback about. And then lastly, the simplicity of the network. It's just a little bit easier to understand than it was before, a little bit more straightforward and cleaner. So that was something that we heard positive feedback about. So we took a lot of that feedback to heart, and as much as we could, we worked to keep the pieces of the draft network that people told us they liked. That includes as many frequent routes as we could, and in keeping that frequency in the middle of the day and in the evenings and on the weekends. We also tried to keep the network as simple as possible because you need to be able to understand something in order to use it. And then lastly, we also kept our eye on connections and making sure that people could connect to other bus routes and other SEPTA modes like regional rail and our trolley network. The other part of our network that we are keeping is the microtransit, which we also call on-demand service. We kind of go back and forth on what we're calling it. And this is really what I like to say, it's how we're revolutionizing transit in the suburbs, because it allows us to invest in those low ridership, high need suburban areas by replacing low performing fixed route service with this new on-demand mode. And what that does is it allows us to improve community connectivity in our boroughs, and then it also allows us to create a seamless connection to our fixed route system for longer trips. Based on feedback this fall, we did end up reducing the overall number of zones from 10 to 8. So we can talk about that because one of those zones was in Montgomery Township. And then we also adjusted the size and the shape of some of the zones based on feedback from stakeholders and additional analysis of the ridership. The microtransit, just a quick refresher if it's a new concept to you. It is, I like to call it next generation dial-a-ride, and it's technology based. So it's kind of it's an on-demand service, so you can either request a pickup using an app on your cell phone, much like a transportation network company like Uber or Lyft, or you can call our call center to schedule a trip in advance or to request that ride. And we have modeled our system so it would be a 30-minute response time. So you'd be able to request a trip using that app on your cell phone and expect the vehicle to come and pick you up within 30 minutes. Now, this is zone-based, so you can't go anywhere in our network. You could go anywhere within that designated zone, and you can go point to point. So you're not restricted to just that fixed route, but you can go anywhere within that zone as long as your origin and your destination are in that zone. And it's operated by SEPTA. It's a SEPTA vehicle. It's a smaller bus. It's not a 40-foot bus. And then it's operated by SEPTA operators as well. cost the same as a SEPTA service, so $2.50 in cash or $2 with our key card. And then the microtransit does accept the senior cards and the reduced fare cards as well. And it is a mode that is most successful in low density areas, low ridership areas. And for us, you know, where we're really trying to invest in this service is in areas where there's that high need. So where we're really serving lower income riders, where we're really serving minority communities, shift work, and a lot of higher need areas that are a little bit harder to serve on fixed routes. So that's sort of been guiding a lot of our decisions. So from there, let's look at some of the bus routes that we have updated. Quick overview. So we did reduce the overall number of bus routes in our system, but we increased the number of frequent routes in our bus network. And which was one of the original goals of the bus revolution, is we are really trying to focus on creating a frequent bus network. We want to invest in our strongest routes to make them even stronger. We introduced 8 microtransit zones, which we have retained in the revised version. And then the important thing to point out is that it is a budget neutral project. So we kept our service hours consistent from our current existing network, and then what we have updated, what we have proposed in our draft updated network. So it's a reallocation of service hours. It's not an expansion into areas that we don't serve today. And this is a quick snapshot of the North Penn area. We have 3 bus routes in this area today. The 94, the 96, and the 132. The 96 we have, for the most part, kept the same as we have it today. And that's what we had in the draft network in the fall as well. It's a very strong route serving Montgomery County. It connects from Norristown Transportation Center to Lansdale and to the Montgomery Mall. And it is very strong for a suburban bus route. The 94, sorry, and let me just point out the frequencies on that. That is a 30 mec service, which means it comes every 30 minutes or more frequently. And that's pretty similar to what we operate today on the 96. The 94 is a 60 mec service that runs between the Chestnut Hill bus loop and the Montgomery Mall. The major trip generator on that route is the Montgomery County Community College. Getting alerts on my computer, excuse me. So that's a 60 max route, so that operates hourly, which is what we run on that route today. That does not go to Lansdale, it goes to the Montgomery Mall. And then we have the 132, which connects, it's not on this map because it is a route we are proposing to eliminate. This is just what we have shared here, but the 132 connects the Montgomery Mall to Lansdale, Hatfield, Telford, Satterton, and it is one of our lowest ridership bus routes. But it's an area that, we know it's important to serve. And so that is what we have proposed to replace with the microtransit service. Earlier, we had all of the fixed route service going to Lansdale train station to Railroad Avenue. And then we removed all of the fixed route bus service from the Montgomery Mall. And the idea was that you would use the microtransit service to connect anywhere east of the Lansdale train station. So we had these 2 overlapping microtransit zones. And I can show you, once I get through these slides, what we had proposed and what we have now. And I can kind of zoom in a little bit so you can see that more clearly. But I know I wanted to touch on why we proposed to eliminate that second microtransit zone. And we started, when we really drilled down into the ridership, we have about 100 boards a day at the Montgomery Mall. And that's too much ridership to serve on microtransit. It would overwhelm the smaller vehicles, and on-demand service is not, for 100 people a day, you want to serve that with fixed route. On-demand would not be an effective way to serve ridership of that scale. And so that was ultimately why we decided we needed to keep fixed route at the mall, we put back both the 94 and the 96 because those are the two stronger bus routes serving that area. So I can kind of dig into some of that data once I get through the slides if you have some follow-up questions on that. We do measure the success of this project through access. So we care about, with our proposed network, how we're increasing access for people in the communities that we serve. So one measure is for the additional number of people who can access an area within 45 minutes of walking and transit on weekdays at noon. With our new network, you can see this expanded by about 40%. Conshohocken, these are all Montgomery County destinations, but in Conshohocken and Norristown, you see that additional access increasing by about 40%. And then also looking at job access, you can see that in Norristown, we're increasing the number of jobs that are accessible within 45 minutes by about 30% as well. So these are a lot of the performance measures that we look at. And then just to go through some of the next steps where we are in this project, as I mentioned, we are sharing our draft revised network now. We will spend the summer incorporating feedback that we receive this spring. We will finalize that bus network, and then in the fall, we plan to go to public hearing. If our board, and here I've got another slide that breaks it down by month, we'll go to public hearing in the summer. And if we plan to make some revisions based on the public hearings, we're very realistic. We know, people will continue to have feedback and comments this fall, and then in December, we would seek our board approval and adoption for the new bus network. If the board adopts it at that time, we would plan to implement starting in the summer of 2024. So not this summer, but next summer. We won't do it all at once. We would break it down into pieces and sort of roll that out over time. Some of our routing changes involve some major capital projects. So we will do that over time. So that is the schedule. And then with that, I have some time for questions and answers, and I can pull up some other maps if that would be helpful, but I'll pause here and see if anyone has questions.
Harley, thank you for that presentation. Very informative, and I appreciate that. I guess I have a one question in particular, the microtransit routes. You said that we can't, or it's not expected that someone can go out of a zone, whatever zone that may be. Is that because most of the microtransit routes aren't really adjacent to each other, that it's expected for the microtransit routes to be kind of that last, quote unquote, last mile, that someone is to take, either the bus or the rail, and then once they get to that location, then maybe for the last couple miles that doesn't have a bus or a rail connection, is that where the microtransit is expected to take over?
Yes, exactly. And there are a couple different purposes for using microtransit, and we're sort of adopting a number of them. But one is, as you mentioned, a first last mile connection. So we have that. I would say this zone and Lansdale maybe serves that purpose a little bit less, but versus in like Malvern, Paoli, this serves the Paoli and the Malvern train stations, and then an office park in a residential area outside. And so I would say this zone is a little bit more of a first last mile connection from the regional rail. But with the zone in Lansdale and Satterton Telford, we were really trying to preserve access for Route 132 riders. So, we have about 200 people a day who ride that route versus in the city, our strong bus routes have about 10,000 riders a day. And as a comparison, let me compare that to the 96 in Lansdale, which is a more appropriate suburban route. And that has around, it used to be 800 or 900, and I think we're a little bit closer to. Let me pull this up. I have it in my. The 96 has about 850 riders a day, and then the 132 has about 200. And so the 132 has very infrequent service. We don't operate it on Sundays. It's less than hourly. I think we do operate it on Sundays. I think it has about 2 to 4 trips on Sunday. But it's not a great bus route. It is the only reason why you take the 132 is because you have no other option. It is very hard for us to justify adding service to the 132 and really to improving it because the ridership is so low. And we know that people are not going to, just adding service isn't going to increase ridership on that route. And so that's the idea of stepping back and saying, let's try something entirely different. So that's why we're doing that in that particular area. And I think the question was about the specific zone. We do restrict them to zones, and that is that has to do with the response time. So we're promising a 30-minute response time, and then we need to know how many vehicles and how many operators to put in that area. So that's an operations planning question, right? So we know that if we put 2 vehicles in this area and they can circulate within that zone, that we can assure people they'll have a vehicle pick them up within 30 minutes. But if we increase the size of the zone, or if then that either impacts our operating costs, then we have to add a 3rd vehicle or a 4th vehicle, or it changes the response time. So that's sort of why it's zone based. It allows us to plan for our operational resources.
Yeah, and the fact that they're not adjacent and contiguous also is a good reason why you can't go from zone to zone. One last question, then we'll turn it over to the conference room there. You had mentioned that this is revenue neutral, that you're shifting kind of your current operations and assets from one area of your operations to another. But then later you said there's some capital intensive work that needs to be done. Is there capital allocation that's going to be spent on this, just not on an ongoing revenue basis? And where is that capital being spent?
So yes, there is a capital component of it, and the capital budget is being spent on our end of line facilities. So that is where the bus routes, where the bus route ends, where the operator, we build in about 10% of the running time into the relief time, and that happens at the end of line facility. So that gives the operator a chance to catch up on their schedule if they're running behind. It also gives them a chance to use restroom facilities. And so it's what allows us to keep those schedules on time. In the city, we own a number of bus loops that we plan our network around. In the suburbs, we rely on private property. So in Montgomery Township, our most important end of line is the Montgomery Mall. And that's challenging because we don't own that facility. We could be asked to leave at any time. That's happened at malls throughout our region. We are actively getting kicked out of a lot of our malls, which means we don't have a place to end our bus routes. And we can't provide service to that area. So as part of this plan, we're trying to purchase land adjacent to some of our private end of line locations and build SEPTA owned facilities where we build our own restroom facilities. We have lighting. We make sure that we're making that space safe for our operators to take recovery. So it's mostly end of line infrastructure.
I think that's a great idea. Just curious why the difficulty with having access to malls at end of line use.
I can give you some examples. So what we're seeing with a lot of the malls in our region is that they're introducing residential. It tends to be a very high, market rate apartments tends to be what we're seeing constructed. And then having a bus layover, and it's an issue during construction. But then it becomes an even bigger issue once those apartments are occupied, that the property manager no longer wants SEPTA vehicles laying over in front of those buildings. Unfortunately, there is a stigma around buses, and especially in the suburbs where they aren't utilized as much as they are in the city. And so we see the buses being blamed for a lot of, they're sort of considered a disamenity. And so we are asked to vacate those premises.
I see. Thank you for that information. I appreciate it. Anybody else have questions?
Leading the microtransit project, I want to make sure that we're getting the zones correct. And so part of, that conversation is making sure that we're talking to the municipalities, to the business leaders, to the riders, to, people within those zones. So I would love for anything specific to the microtransit to come to me so I can keep track of that.
That's great. Well, thanks.
Harley, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's 9 o'clock. I know you have to run, so I want to be respectful of your time. So thank you very much for that update. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate you inviting me. Hope to stay in touch. Take care. Bye.